leadership in life, I found, isn't generally defined by the extraordinary days in your life. It's defined by whether or not you engage in ordinary behaviors with extraordinary consistency.
Hi, I am Edita Tahiri, one of the key leaders of independence of Kosovo and former Deputy Prime Minister, and you are listening to the Ed Show.
Welcome to That Show, a podcast where I sit with some amazing personalities from across sectors and borders to have meaningful conversation on topics that matters to us.
My guest for the day is someone who has been widely known for his leadership talk. He has been called as one of the most inspirational TED speakers in the world, and his TED talk, Everyday Leadership, the Lollipop Moments, was voted as one of the 15 most inspirational TED Talks of all times. After spending almost 8 years as the director of one of Canada's largest leadership development program at the University of Toronto, he started his own leadership development organization, Day One Leadership, and helped top organizations around the world increase their leadership capacity. His clients include McDonald's, American Express, JP Morgan Chase, and top universities around the world, amongst many more. He is the Wall Street Journal best-selling author of This is Day One, a practical guide to leadership that matters. And this book is reputed at rank 6 on Wall Street Journal's best-selling list. He is a great mentor and indeed a great friend. He is Drew Dudley. Hey Drew, welcome on the show.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure to be here, my friend. Thanks.
And how's COVID-19 situation holding you up?
Well, it's keeping me inside and giving me an excuse to work on all of the projects I'd been putting off for a year before that. So there's no way to claim I'm too busy traveling right now. So I'm trying to look on the bright side and realize that, hey, you know what? Here's the chance to get all that stuff done that I've been promising myself I'd do. And also, it's a chance to learn a new skill, right? Like I've never been a virtual presenter, a guy who does his presentations without the audience in the room. And so it's been interesting to learn something new. I'm trying to look at it that way, as opposed to, dear Lord, I just desperately want to get on a plane and fly somewhere.
And that's great. But the other thing which is great about you is that you have been an educator for almost 10 years.
Yeah, yeah.
So doing presentation in a closed room is as good as a teacher teaching these days online.
Yeah, it really is a whole different vibe. And one of the things that's caught me is how much, for anybody out there wondering about, what teachers are going through, it takes a ton more energy to try to stay focused looking into a lens than it does when you've got an audience of learners in front of you. And I didn't realize how much more tiring these sessions would be when I considered, oh, you're exhausted after a speech. You're laying it all out there on the stage for people. And now it's sort of, wow, this is exhausting too. So it's a change for everybody and it has been different, but at the same time, I get to learn something new. And honestly, my friend, I hadn't been home for more than 8 days in a row, more than twice in 10 years. And
Right?
so it's been nice to have a home again. And so trying to find that trying to find that positive and that growth within all of this is kind of the only way you stay sane in it all, right?
And while we are all going in our own comfort zone, sitting at home and doing all these sessions online, do you feel that when things get back to normal, it'll be again a challenge for every one of us to get back to the old normal since we are already in the new normal space?
Yeah, I mean, I had a good friend of mine who was a hardcore entrepreneur. She was one of Canada's 30 under 30 most dynamic women, etc. And she had an accident where she fell and hit her head and got a traumatic brain injury.
Oh
And
my God! Hope
spe-
she's fine now.
well, she's not, at least in terms of what those of us from the outside might think. But what's interesting is she was told, it'll be 6 weeks, the concussion will fade. And it never did. She had to spend 6 months in her bedroom with all the blinds drawn because she couldn't handle light or sound stimuli. And if you can imagine that, like, oh, well, okay, 6 months locked in a room, but at least I could read, or at least I could watch TV, at least I could listen to podcasts. Nothing. She had to hide under a cold compress for 6 months. And when she came out of that, it got a little bit better. her frustration was she kept waiting for it to go back to normal, back to the way it was, back to the way her mind worked before, and it just wasn't. And what she finally said when I had a chance to chat with her afterwards was things got better for her when she stopped trying to evaluate her life based on how close it was to what it used to be, and instead started to ask herself, what is my life now? What is my new normal? And maybe my problem is that I keep evaluating where I am based on comparing it to where I used to be. Wherein she said, if I'd look at how close or different I am, or how much this new normal is, like, what if it was what was going to be the rest of my life? What would I make of that? And so she actually became an artist and got married and is significantly happier now, she says, than she was when she was this hyper driven entrepreneur. But she said one of the key pieces is we see healing as getting back to what we were before, as opposed to healing being embracing where we are now, and meaning that healing is about accepting a new normal. Healing is not necessarily finding your way back to your old normal. And I always found that really interesting when, as we're going through this entire pandemic, is thinking to myself, when we start to come through it, are we going to be in a super hurry to get back to what we were before? Or is this an opportunity to take a step and say, okay, well, let's not try to just get back to where we were. It was pretty flawed. So that's what I'm interested in seeing is how many of us are struggling because we evaluate how healthy we are by how close we were to what we used to be, as opposed to how well we can do whatever we are. So that might have been a little convoluted, but I've never forgotten her telling me that she got better and healed when she stopped seeing health as what she used to be and started seeing health as where she was and saying, this is normal, and let's stop being upset because something's wrong because I'm not what I used to be. So I think I think normal is something that we need to take a look at and ask ourselves, are we really in a hurry to get right back there?
Right. And this entire COVID situation actually opened up doors for various possibilities that we kind of actually wanted to do since last couple of years, but we were not getting time.
Yeah.
Just give you an example. This podcast, I wanted to start this podcast maybe 4 years back. And remember when uh, day one leadership, your book was launched. I even messaged you that let's have a chat.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that was like we're coming
Right.
up on 3 years now.
Right. That was somewhere around 2 years
Yeah,
back, right? And I wanted to have this podcast back then, but then couldn't
yeah,
get time. But now during the COVID-19 situation, I actually thought, this is the
yeah.
time. This is when I'm sitting at home and I don't have anything else to do. I cannot go to my office. If I cannot start a podcast right now, then I'll never be able to
Yeah,
start it.
you did the podcast, and I decided to try this sleeping thing. That was a really nice addition to my life. I'm not going to lie. So all the stuff that we've been meaning to do for years, you doing the podcast, me trying to sleep, these are all things that COVID gave us a chance to actually do. So I'm not sure how I miss audiences, my friend, but man, I'm not sure how excited I am to start getting back into airports. You know what I mean? And sitting in planes. So
Right.
I've now gotten kind of used to talking to my
I
friends.
completely feel you,
Yeah,
brother.
like, oh,
Completely feel
I'm
you.
like, oh wow, I kind of like being home and having my own bed and being able to form a life. So yeah, my friend, it's. I think how we think about what normal is and how desirable it is, and how we should be able to flex into a new type of normal and embrace it is an important leadership to skill, right? So just instead of immediately trying to return ourselves to status quo, asking ourselves, okay, can we embrace a new form of normal? I think is a good idea.
Yeah, and other than this, in one of your talks, you had actually mentioned that leadership can be as little as showing empathy, and people don't understand that these little things actually create a great leader.
Yeah, I think for me, a big piece too is that it's not little for me, it's
And
simple.
even, and it's not just about empathy. Even whatever we are going through amidst COVID-19, and whatever new things we are learning, and how we are taking charge of our lives. This is about leadership,
It
isn't it?
100% it is, and again, it for me, it's leadership is in simple acts, not necessarily little ones. I think that when I talk about simple acts of leadership, I'm talking about things like empathy and forgiveness and kindness and recognition. These individual moments or actions are, in my mind, powerful leadership moments. And we don't call them powerful. We actually, give them the other title. We call them the little things. And they're not little, they're powerful leadership moments. And I think before we can start to reframe our understanding of leadership, we have to reframe our understanding of what a leadership act is. And to me, that means a powerful moment of interpersonal impact, right? And those are things like a moment of empathy, a moment of kindness. The thing is, we call them little, meaning we diminish them in our own minds and on a social level. But also, I think what happens is we start to ignore the power that was in them. And I think what's really important to remember is that almost every source of power on the planet, like there's systemic barriers between that power and most of the people on earth. But the ability to create these like really powerful moments that change the course of someone's day in just a few seconds, as little as a few seconds, these simple things, and they're not little, but we do use that word a lot. These simple things are powerful. And I do believe that it's so easy to feel powerless in a world, especially one that hits you with a pandemic, among economic uh, disparities, among cultural disparities. And I think that it's so easy to feel like we are a powerless person. And part of it's because we have used our own language to diminish the most powerful stuff that we do. And there are no systemic barriers between any individual on the planet and the ability to create one of these really great moments in somebody's life in a simple individual act. And I think that what we do, and is we've wrapped up leadership with the extraordinary, right? We celebrate these amazing things that hardly anybody can do. But there really is no limit to our ability to create powerful moments of leadership. We just don't call them that. We diminish them. And we've been taught to do that from a really young age. But I think that's what's really important is to realize that simple doesn't mean little, right? Taking a moment to create a simple act of recognition or empathy or whatever the case may be, not a little thing, but we've done it because we've been socialized to see leadership as something that not everyone can or should embrace. It's for only the people with the best grades or who go to the best schools or who make the most money. And that alienates most of us from the concept of leadership, to be honest, which is what I used to travel around the world on planes trying to convince people. And, now we try to do it from our little studio and beam it out to the world and do things like talk to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one thing which I have realized is that people often consider leadership as a position, but leadership isn't position.
No, I mean, it's a type of leadership, right? And I think that we think of it as positions because as we're taught about leadership, that's what we're taught. This person was in this position. And it's almost like a prerequisite before you start studying someone as a leader or use it as an example for people, they have to hold some position of authority. And if every example that you're given in an education system is somebody in a position of authority, or who rose to a position of authority, then ultimately you're going to start assuming that's what leadership is. Like when you want people, I mean, we're talking about education here. When you want people to understand a new idea, particularly young people, if you're an educator,
Hmm.
what you do is you give examples of it, right?
Right.
But whatever examples you give first to someone, not only does it shape how they think about it for the rest of their life, but it limits how they think about it for the rest of their life. So when we give only examples of giants, like look at Warren Buffett, look at Steve Jobs, look at Abraham Lincoln, look at Gandhi, look at like you roll through all of these giants, scientific groundbreakers, people who conquered empires, presidents, heads of nations. Well, what it effectively does is it makes people look for leadership only in people like that. It causes most of us to devalue our leadership. So a big part of it is how we're taught about it. Because your first examples of leaders, I'm almost going to guarantee you, were giants. And that means that when we look at leadership or we look for leadership, we look for it from giants. And that started really early on. It was entirely about the first examples we were ever given and the examples that we continue to reinforce. We focus on people's profile as opposed to behaviors when we evaluate leadership.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I have always seen, even educators in the classrooms when they talk about leadership with the kids, they always take big names. And one thing which I have realized is that, kids learn from experiences, isn't it? Or exposure. But when we talk about educators or parents and how they behave in front of them, don't you feel that before even empowering our young people, we will first need to change our behavior?
Oh, without a doubt. I think in this is what I've always found really interesting about social media. I'm just not sure that the world socially is prepared to adequately handle the amount of disinformation that can now be distributed about situations, about the world, about science, about each other. And I think that what I find really interesting about social media is like, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I'm pretty sure that my parents misbehaved, right? Like that adults did dumb things and said stupid things and were at their worst behavior. There's no doubt about that. But I didn't see any of it. Like I didn't really understand it. I didn't get to. My parents told me, don't do drugs and be polite to other people and don't bully. All these messages that parents give you, and I didn't get to see them behaving differently very often. But when you think about it now, you could be on Twitter at 8 years old, although I know that nobody under 35 is on Twitter now, but apparently I'm told by my 25-year-old staff. But you could be on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook at a very young age now. And on those platforms, you can tell kids all you want not to bully. You can tell kids all you want to be generous, to be kind to one another. And then you go on social media, and kids as young as 6, 7, 8 can watch adults at their absolute worst. Like, can watch adults behave like petulant, lying, jealous scumbags. And that's what we see on social media, especially on Twitter. And our kids can see that, and they're in the exact same world we are. There's no barriers up between the adult world and the child world in terms of seeing behavior. So what happens now, which I think more than in any time in the last 100 years, really since the Industrial Revolution started, or let's not say that, let's say since everyday schooling started, where kids are not in the workforce as early. Honestly, it's never been so easy for kids to see the worst in their parents, to see the worst in other adults. And where do we get off telling kids not to behave in certain ways when they could see every single day that we're doing the same thing? Like, you are a teacher in every decision you make and every action that you engage in which you engage. Like, you are a teacher in everything you say and do. And so what I think has happened is we're not paying as close attention to the lessons that we give by our behaviors outside of teachers in the classrooms, right? So we're a teacher, every action we do, every statement we make. So we're not paying that close attention to the lessons, because how do we tell kids not to bully each other when you've got the president of the United States doing it with a megaphone on Twitter every single day? Like, you just can't hide kids from that anymore. And I think they learn it. And let's face it, how likely are you to learn, to embrace, to listen to people who you openly know are hypocrites? And I think that's something we have to bear in mind, that we are all teachers every day, but what lessons are we choosing to teach unconsciously because we're not thinking about it?
We can still put a child filter or child lock on Netflix or Amazon Prime, but there is no child filter or child lock on social media. I agree with you on that.
Oh man. Oh man, yeah, and honestly, there's no child lock on our behavior. Like, if you're gonna yell at somebody in front of a kid, if you're going to make a promise in front of a child and then later on be like, no, say to a friend or a spouse or a partner, oh, we're not gonna do that. Like, there's where the lessons are.
Even breaking simple
Oh
laws.
yeah, jaywalking.
As adults, we always break law. Even we jump street signals and we find it to be cool.
Yeah, or saying crap behind people's backs, right? Like, you come home and
Right.
your kids saw somebody in a store and you were polite to them there, and then you go back and you say to somebody else like what a jerk that person is. Like, this is where behaviors are learned, and cultural expectations drive all of our behaviors, and our cultural expectations for each other, I think, have lowered. And I also do believe that what we've basically done is we teach cultural expectations for leadership, in terms of, if you're not an extrovert, if you're not super outgoing, if you don't like being the center of attention, leadership isn't for you. And we culturally teach that. And we teach it from the examples that we give, but also in the way that we provide rewards, and the way that the school system says that we're going to evaluate you, the quality of you as a person, with grades. And really, it's how well you do academically in the first 20 years of your life that is the best indicator of how successful you will be. And we teach kids that if they don't write tests and essays well, that they are lesser than people who do. And I think that that's a dangerous piece as well, because I think a lot of the bullying that goes on in our schools comes from.
And you know what is the irony? The irony is that we, in in educational institutions, we teach our kids that we will only evaluate you based on your performance. But we, as institutions, we can buy awards,
Yeah,
and kids see that.
yeah, and oh man, what does that teach, right? Yeah, like that's a lesson too. Is like whoever has the money makes the rules, and I'm with you. It's I think it just a lot of it comes back to by the time kids turn 10, 11, 12, their perception of what a leader is, their perceptions of what success is, have often coalesced into a less than healthy image, if that makes any sense. And I think that since we're all educators, if you're a parent, you're the most important educator there is. If you are a teacher, that you're another one, professor, another type of educator. But we need to recognize which untaught lessons in the education system are most dangerous, because there are things that are learned even though they're never explicitly taught. And a lot of those things stand in the way of leadership and success and happiness, in my mind.
Hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. And since you have spent approximately 10 years since in education space, if I'm not wrong.
Oh, I guess at this point we're coming up on 20. I left the university 10 years ago to move and talk about this, but
But how does your teaching experience in a university setup uh, help you shape your journey of this being a leadership coach?
well, I mean, first of all, I wasn't actually a professor at U of T. I ran their leadership development program, which was a co-curricular program. So we work within the academic realm on the theory side, but we also wanted to create an experience that focused on actual leadership behaviors. And I'd say that probably the biggest way that I was impacted by that, because I was in the classroom 3 or 4 times a week, like doing workshops and theory based lectures and such. But I think that one of the ways it was shaped is because the students wouldn't call themselves leaders. And when you're surrounded every day by these brilliant young people who fight for social justice and give up their weekends for fundraising and work to make their campus and community better, or are a fundamental part of their family unit because they're taking care of their younger siblings or their extended family. Like, these are individuals who give so much of their self and their minds and their commitment, and they won't call themselves leaders. Like, how on earth did that happen, was my thought. And here I am standing in front of classrooms talking about leadership theory, about how to be a manager, about how to one day effectively be in charge of people. And I realized that I'm just reinforcing the education system's message that you're less than until we're done with you. So, like, you can't survive in the world without our university degree, which is kind of an inherently, like, it's just kind of a lie that everybody has agreed to buy into, because it benefits universities, because it puts them on a pedestal in terms of where they fit in society, and it also allows the business world to just be a little bit lazier. So you can say to yourself, well, probably the person who needs to do this job would be ready to do so after high school. But to make sure that we get somebody who can think at a high school level, we'll just take undergraduates. And then, oh, well, a university undergraduate could probably do this job. But because we don't want to get a bad one, we'll just demand a master's degree, because the best way to make sure that somebody can think at level B is to pick somebody who's advanced to level A. And I think that what that does is it for the first 20 some years of most people's lives, they are made to feel as if they are less than. And the people within the education system are the ones who will allow them to become more, but you have to impress them. And so that's kind of a disempowering deal, isn't it? And I think that we have to be aware of how dangerous that system is, because it makes a lot of really smart people believe that they're not smart yet, that only once they're given a piece of paper and jump through all the hoops that they're given, that now they're leaders. And that's a big part of what my time in the education system taught me, is that these individuals had been disempowered and made to pay us, and just kind of look up and say, well, what do I need to know, as opposed to what am I going to go find out on my own. And that really shaped me, man. It basically made me realize that most of the best leaders I knew didn't see themselves as leaders. And I wanted to come up with a way of changing that perspective, to let them know that They're not training to be a leader one day. They have the ability to create those moments right now. They've just been taught to defer because the education system often teaches compliance over courage. And so that really shaped me, my friend, to watch how disempowered some of the most extraordinary people I knew actually felt.
And what I have seen in the educational institution setup is that we have a complete contrast. On one end, we indirectly preach that students are not leaders, and on the other end, when we are talking about you know uh, communicating with the authority leadership instead of the leadership in the
Mhm.
literal sense, this is a complete contrast. And well, some of the people who are at authority, even they lack leadership skills. How do you see that? And what was your experience dealing with authority based leadership?
Yeah, I think that what you're trying to do when you talk about leadership is that one of the things that I discovered is that individuals who rise to the top of a system are not particularly enthused about changing the system. And so what tends to happen is the idea of everyone can be a leader or leadership is more based in behavior than it is in position. You often get pushback from individuals who have risen to, what they consider merit-based leadership or positional leadership. They feel that they are in that position because they've earned it, because they've worked harder, because they're smarter, and maybe people don't say it out loud, but we've kind of taught that. A student came up to me at the end of my first ever workshop on leadership. I was talking about leadership theory, and she told me, I don't understand leadership right now. And I said, well, we got all semester to figure it out. That's why we're doing these courses. And she said, no, I understood it before I came here, and now I'm all confused. And so I asked her to clear it up for me. And she said, look, I'm an international student. I didn't grow up here in Canada. I'm studying here abroad. And where I grew up, we were taught the smartest people are supposed to be the leaders. The smartest people are the ones who get the best grades. And that's how you find out. Like, if you get good grades, it's your way of showing the world that one day you deserve to be a leader. And if you don't, it's your way of showing the world that you never deserve that responsibility. But after listening to you, I think leadership means something different in Canadian. And, we can talk about whether Canadians own language leadery. But she said, could you explain what it means in the simplest English terms possible? And man, I don't know if you've ever been asked a question that you have the answer, but then somebody asks you the question and you just choke on it. Because that's where I was, man. I had no idea. So I did the old educator trick, right? You look at her and go, well, what do you think? And so, but yeah, what happens is when you go through a system that teaches that and you stay up all night studying over and over again, and your teachers pat you on the back and your fellow students are like, wow, I wish I could do what you do. And then somebody comes along saying, no, no, leadership is about how you behave, not what you achieve. Well, with all the pressure that's put on young people to academically excel, like, I think we can all see how that would be kind of upsetting if you've like given up nights out with your friends, if you've stressed yourself to the point of getting sick, if you've like managed to not sleep because you're worried about how well you do at school, and because you've been told if you do it you're going to get awards, you're going to make more money, you're going to get these management positions, this merit-based leadership. Well, when we teach merit-based and then we only reward a certain type of behavior and a certain type of intelligence, that to me is fundamentally flawed. But I think part of the reason that the ideas that leadership is tied to positions endures is because of how much some people have given up to earn those positions. They've given up relationships, they've given up their health, they've given up hours of their lives, time with their families, to become vice president or to become doctor this or whatever. So you can understand why it would be a big resistance to any idea of leadership that said, oh, no, no, no. Leadership isn't this stuff that you had to sacrifice for. Leadership is in behaviors that we can all do. And I think that's part of it, my friend, is that people get taught leadership is not something to which everyone can or should aspire. It's only the special few who get it. And if you get into the special few, then you get all these extra rewards. So work hard, work hard, work hard. And when somebody the more you sacrifice to get something, the more you'll hold on to it tightly, which is why people who hate their jobs are so uptight about their money, because they had to sacrifice a piece of their soul to get it. But I think that's part of where it comes from, my friend, is that this tension between, positional leadership that exists, how we traditionally taught it, merit based, whatever meritocracy, that the best people have risen to the point. uh, Honestly, if you've gone through that system and you beat yourself up to excel in it, of course you're going to be resistant to the idea that leadership could have a broader definition. It makes you question whether you had to do and all you did and sacrifice everything you did, right? So I understand the pushback from people when they're like, "Stop it with this fluff that everyone is a leader."
Absolutely. And you have been empowering kids from all around the world, and simultaneously you have been traveling all around the world organizing your leadership coaching programs. What was the most unique experience or interesting experience you have had with people?
Oh man. Oh wow. What's interesting is in the book I talk about this interaction I had with two veterans of World War II. And it's interesting because this is one of the answers to the question, but in sort of an indirect way, is they told me that greatest is the enemy of great. And what he meant by that is, I said, I ask people what the happiest moment of their life is, and people can't tell me. Yet they can tell me how much money they make or what their title is, but I say the happiest moment of their lives, and they blank. And one of these men that I'd met, one was 89 and one was 91. And he leaned forward and he said, "That's because it's a dumbass question." And I said, you think it's stupid to ask people to identify the happiest moment of their life, to show them that they haven't thought about these things. And he said, I think it's far more important for you as an educator to know how dangerous that question is. Because he said, you only get one happiest moment of your life. And what you're doing is you're reinforcing this society wide tendency to focus on only the best and ignore anything that isn't the very best. But there's only one happiest moment. There's only one best meal. There's only one most beautiful sunset, one most incredible kiss in your life. You get one of each. But numbers 2 through 25 are also pretty great. Like your fourth most beautiful sunset you've ever seen is still a pretty wonderful moment in your life.
Absolutely.
But we keep focusing on the greatest, the happiest, the most delicious. And he said, we diminish many of the great things in our lives because they're not the greatest. He said, greatest is the enemy of great, Drew. Remember that. And so I said, okay, well, what should we teach instead? Right? If I'm going to say, okay, well, don't just focus on the very best, focus on the multitude of things in your life. So how do I teach people that? Because you can't just say don't do it the way you've always done it and not give a solution, right?
Hmm.
And so he said, what I want you to do is I want you to draw a line in your mind called the great line. And whenever you experience something good in your life, whether it's a sunset, a kiss, a moment of happiness, instead of what we instinctively do, which is call up the rankings in our head and figure out where it slots into the rankings, instead only ask one question. Was that above the great line? And if it was above the great line, well, then that's all you need to know. You don't need to know where it ranks. Just recognize that you just had one of those moments in your life. And the goal is not to constantly supplant the number one experience in any category. It's to collect as many things above the great line in that category as possible. So, yeah, let's say if life's a poker game, you get one chip for the best of everything: meal, travel, uh, sunset, kiss, whatever. You get one. You'll only have a limited number of chips that you can earn. But if you give yourself a chip for every single thing that qualifies as being above the great line, well, there's no limit to the amount of riches that you can accumulate in the course of a lifetime. And that to me, so it's interesting you say, what's the coolest moment or most best interaction with people, because that story is much longer. But those two men were an essential piece of one of the coolest moments of my life. And their message was, try never to answer the question, what is the best, what is the greatest, what is the most interesting? Never try to answer that question, because what you're doing is you're trying to pick the top. So that interaction with those guys was one of the things above the great line. And and it fits in well with your answer is that interaction with those two men changed the way that I looked at gratitude and evaluation of my life, as opposed to, when I have a cool, like I have this podcast, right? And I'm sort of like, man, it's awesome to talk to somebody around the world, to talk about education and leadership. But instinctively, years ago, I would have been like, oh, that was probably the fifth best podcast I've ever gotten to visit, or the 14th best, or the whatever, right? It wasn't as good as that one time. And again, I'm just making this up. I'm not saying your podcast doesn't kick ass, but you know what I mean? Like, it could be like I could be here thinking, 3 years ago I did that podcast with this and that and this. I don't. I just know that I got to get up early and talk to somebody who cared about leadership and education. This goes above the great line. And I found that it expands your ability to recognize how lucky you are as an individual, a person, and a leader. And it stops you ignoring some of the best stuff in your life. So that's one of the coolest above the great line interactions I had with these two men who had met on D-Day. They had stormed the beaches at Normandy together in World War II. They'd
Mhm.
been shot by the same bullet. And here I was talking to this 91 and 89-year-old man on a train across Canada, having, having a drink with them. And here they were telling me this amazing way of looking at life that he developed because he thought he was going to die when he was 16 years old on a beach. And when it was all over, he said, I'm going to do a better job recognizing the greatness around me. And so, you asked me what's the coolest experience. I can't tell you, but I can give you that example of above the great line. Because for me, we're all better off if we recognize that greatest is the enemy of great. And instead of trying to create stacks of memories, we just create an attic. And with a stack, you got to figure out where your memory slots in on the level, like which level. But if you have an attic, you just throw it in. And then at any point you can go visit the attic and pick anything up. They're not ranked. You just pick it up and you have a cool memory, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely, and what can be cooler than listening to your story? And one thing which I have realized all this while, during whatever years I'm on this earth, is that life gives you multiple opportunities to celebrate.
Hmm.
It's like your lollipop moment, the way you say always, right? Now when we are talking about lollipop moment, or your most experiential or enriching moment, uh, it is like an opportunity that knocks your door, but majority of the people, they don't value that opportunity, and they only recall it once the opportunity is gone, isn't it?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is I heard someone once say that you're never aware of the biggest moments in your life as they're happening, which I've always found really interesting because we go into certain days thinking this is going to be like a big day in my life. This is a turning point, like this presentation or this test or this job interview, right? Like this is where my life changes. And it's just when you look back, it's hardly ever the case, right? Our our lives, the biggest, most important turning points in our lives, we hardly ever are aware of them as they're happening. And I think that one of the things that I try to get across to individuals is it is like when we evaluate ourselves as people, as leaders, we put a lot of focus on the extraordinary days where things happen that don't usually happen. And leadership in life, I found, isn't generally defined by the extraordinary days in your life. It's defined by whether or not you engage in ordinary behaviors with extraordinary consistency. Because how you behave day to day in the ordinary days plays a pretty big role in the nature and the frequency of the extraordinary days in our lives. And so I think that part of my focus when I talk about personal leadership is all right, let's not worry about the big picture so much as let's identify certain non-negotiable behaviors that have to happen every day with extraordinary consistency. And then if we do those every day, the longer term goals we have will happen. And I think that when we one of the things I think that reinforces the idea that it's our daily behavior that probably is more important to our long-term success than any of these big moments is I was once at a conference, and after the conference when I was doing the Q&A, a professor asked me at a business school, can you tell me the single most transformative moment in your career? And I love Q&As, like when people ask you questions to which you don't have an answer. That's the best part of a Q&A because then you learn something. And I'd never been asked that. I'd never reflected on that. Tell me about the single most transformative moment in your career specifically, because it's a business school and life doesn't count, only careers. But I thought about it and I realized, man, I probably wasn't in the room for the most transformative moment in my career. Like, the most transformative moment in my career was almost certainly a group of people that I didn't know or barely knew discussing amongst themselves whether or not I should be given an opportunity. And I wasn't there at that moment to influence it. What they were using to make that determination is what I had done and how I had behaved leading up to that moment. But I wasn't there to help them. So was it the person who decided to select me as the national chair of the big charity that really introduced me to a lot of the most influential people in my life and gave me a lot of the experiences that led to the university? Was it those people? Was that the biggest moment? Was it the group of people who decided to invite me to that TED event to end up giving the speech that sort of spread around the internet with millions of views? Was that the most transformative moment in my career? Because that led to the next one, which is an agent coming up to me and saying, can I represent you to speak around the world? Was it, was it the individuals who decided to give me this award, which raised my profile, or the group of people who looked at my book outline? You know what I mean? Like, there's all these moments where people are looking at your behavior and how you made them feel and what impact you've had, and then they decide to give you an opportunity. But you're not in the room for that. That's not a moment where you get to shape it. It was your cumulative behaviors and impact that led to that transformative moment. Most of the biggest moments in our lives we're not in the room for. Somebody else has to evaluate who we are as a person, how we've made them feel, how we've made others feel on our daily behaviors, and decide whether we get an opportunity. So that to me has always kept my eyes open, being like, oh my God, I got to worry about this test or this interview or this moment. No, what you have to worry about are all the days in between, whether or not you actually engaged in behaviors that defined who you were as a person. Like, leadership is not in accolades and titles earned over time. It's on consistency in daily behavior, non-negotiable things that you say will be a part of every day of your life. And for me, I have 6 core values that I have to find a way to live every day, non-negotiable. Can't argue my way out of it. And honestly, there are days where nothing that I had planned goes right, but at the end of the day I can go home and say, "Yeah, but I got 3 out of these 6 values lived today, and that's my goal." And so even on the days where I don't win, I didn't waste. And I think that we can lose on days where we can get beaten by the world, but if you identified certain behaviors that were a part of that day, even when everything blew up in your face, that day was a loss, but it wasn't a waste. And if you lose, you played. There's respect in losing, right? There's respect in playing right and losing and working hard, but not in wasting. So for me, I'd rather play a day and lose, but still live the values I care about, even in a loss, than just be like, I wasted today. You waste enough days. You feel like you wasted enough days. It changes how you think about yourself, and when you change how you think about yourself, it changes how you treat other people.
And one of the examples which I always quote when I'm communicating with educators is that when you talk about positional leadership, and you rightly quoted in this discussion previously that when we talk about leaders, we only take names which are great,
Yeah.
right? But when you see great leaders, even in today's world, now why is that majority of the leaders who are great, you talk about Bill Gates, you talk about Steve Jobs, you talk about you name it, right? Majority of them are dropouts or they were the backbencher, right? Why is it that? Because and majority of the kids who was studying to the best of their abilities and scoring high percentage, they are employees. Majority of them are employees. Why is it that? The pure reason is that you have transformed them into machines.
Yeah, I think that we measured one type of intelligence. And I think that's a key piece, is that when you measure one type of intelligence, you bring one type of thinker to the top of a system. And once you hit the top of a system, it's very unlikely you'll change the system, right? And so I'm not crapping on kids who do great at school. I really am not. The message I always conveyed to my students was you should work incredibly hard to make your grades extraordinary. Like, I'm not going to deny that. Your grades will open doors for you, your grades will kick down doors for you. But
Even I'm not denying. The only thing that I'm talking about from the educator point of view,
yeah,
that you need to be human, and at the same time, yes, it is kids' responsibility and it's their job to study well and to score high percentage. But at the same time, it is your job to be human.
oh,
Don't transform kids into machines,
without a doubt. I
isn't
mean,
it?
the message for me is like work incredibly hard to make your grades extraordinary, and then work twice as hard to make sure they're the least impressive thing about you. That to me is education. Like work hard, man, to meet your obligations, to make your grades amazing. But when you graduate, for wherever you're going to graduate, whether it's middle school or junior high or high school or secondary school, we all have different terminology for it. But just when you graduate, please make sure your grades are the least impressive thing about you. And I think that that is the idea, is that what is it, people will pay attention to whatever is rewarded, right? And so if grades are rewarded, then people are going to focus on that to the detriment of their emotional intelligence, etc. So I think that's a key, is like, how do we set up a different reward structure, because we are reward based creatures. And you said celebrations earlier, and I think that, yeah, I think celebrations are so important. And I think that celebrations are what give us strength and pride and momentum. And I think that setting goals is planning celebrations. That's what setting goals are, is planning celebrations. And we teach people to plan and set goals for their academics, and to set goals for their finances, and to set goals for their career. And I think that leadership is spending just as much time and just as many resources setting and chasing goals for your daily character, as you do for your academics and for your career and for your organizations, for anything. And for me, I think that that's a key piece, is that most of the goals that young people are taught to chase focus on only one type of intelligence. And that was what started me on the world of wanting to talk about this stuff, is a single TED talk by Ken Robinson, Sir Ken Robinson, who did a TED talk called "Do Schools Kill Creativity?" And he just died a month and a half ago or so, which really upset me, because that talk is what started me speaking about this. And to just because when Ken Robinson stood up there and said, the way that we educate kids makes them less effective and less creative and less happy, it was me being able to look and say, oh my God, I thought I was the only one, right? I thought I was the only one who thought this. And now you and I, here we are having a conversation. We're clearly not the only ones, my friend.
Absolutely, and he clearly and categorically mentioned that education kills creativity,
Yeah, yeah.
which was actually a game changer for me as well. When I thought that now it's enough that I have headed an organization which was into teacher training, but now I need to make my career in education.
Without a doubt. And hey, like, there's also people doing the same thing for doctors, right? Like, the idea that education for doctors is all about the human body and not at all about humanity.
Absolutely.
And I think that there's people out there like you who are identifying there's incredibly intelligent people who want to do good in the world. And there was this hole in their education. And they'll admit it too. Like, doctors, I've been invited to speak at commencement addresses for MDs, and I'm just like, they're all smarter than I am. Why am I delivering the commencement address? And the answer is because the stuff that you talk about isn't part of our curriculum, and it's easy to lose sight of the humanity when you're trying to treat the human illness. And education's the same way. And I think that's amazing that you've sort of identified, because we're not saying to people that you're dumb. We're not saying that you screwed up. We're saying there was a hole in what we're taught. And if we're going to keep being a part of the system that left that hole in our education, we should all step up and find a way to close that hole for the people to come after us.
And don't you believe that leadership is nothing but humanity, being human?
I think that leadership is recognizing other people's humanity and how yours can impact it. And even in an individual moment.
Absolutely.
And you talked about empathy earlier, man, and I'll be straight with you. It's so hard right now. Like, we have been divided. I'm based out of North America right now. I mean, I'm Canadian, so it's different. But down, the United States, the most powerful economy on the planet and a massive influence on culture everywhere, has divided itself so strongly that it's causing us, and myself included, to struggle to find empathy, because we look and we say, well, they haven't earned it. Like the other side, whichever side you sort of identify with. The problem is there are sides. Um, and it's hard to have empathy. Like even I myself have found myself so disgusted at certain behavior that I catch myself saying, I don't care about what they're facing. I don't care. Like, and that's less than the man I want to be. And so empathy is so important because small groups of people, because it serves their purpose, are trying to remove our empathy for huge groups of other people by saying we're two different teams and that you may be the worst member of our team, but you're still better than the best member of theirs. And so a very small group of people for whom power, they benefit from us not liking one another. What they've done is they were trying to destroy empathy for other human beings because they disagree with us politically. And they may disagree on a relatively small amount of things, but there's some powerful factions that are trying to pit us against one another. And without empathy, we will stop seeing humanity. So you talked to that word earlier on, right off the top, and I want to circle it back as we get towards the end, about how crucial that word is, how crucial the concept of empathy is, and to bear in mind that individuals who have benefited from the current system are continuing to try to keep the system as it is by systematically destroying our capacity and our interest in demonstrating empathy. The divisions between us worldwide and within countries are fostered by a relatively small group of people who benefit from those conflicts and that lack of empathy. And as educators, if we can point that scam out, then I think we've done something good.
But I always believe that our generation and the millennials, we are at the cusp of this fourth industrial revolution, and how during this era everything is changing, and how we are being manipulated by some external forces. And this is hard time for all of us to kind of understand what we are going through. And I'm not just talking from the political powers or people who are in a particular list who are trying to manipulate our brains, but you know even if you see what's happening on social media, everything is playing a role. And one thing which we need to understand is that we need to keep everything aside and first trying to be a human.
Yeah, it's interesting that we, at this point in society, we read more about other people than we do interact with
Absolutely.
them. And so, yeah, I think that that's what's interesting is that social media has given avenues to connect and made some things possible that are good, but it also allows for a relationship between people to be decided before those people even meet, if that makes any sense. So, like, thousands of people can tell you something is true about someone before you've learned anything about them in person. And I think that that's dangerous. Is that we learn about people less from them themselves and more from what's written about them and said about them by others. And that means that people know they can manipulate what messages you get about people, and you have no other information. So I think that that's an important piece, is that social media, uh, for all that it does to bring people together, is also the most powerful, not the most, it is rapidly becoming the most powerful source of misinformation in human history. Um, and as such, we need to do a better job as educators, m- helping young people discern between the stuff that's being put out there to divide us and the truth. Because most of the stuff that's put out there to divide us is not necessarily the truth. And even if it is, it's being carefully crafted in a way to cause a desire to win. Because I think that's the big difference in leadership, is that leaders try to remove fear so that we can succeed. And politicians all too often add fear so that they can win. And our desire and the concept of teaching people to try to win is what is the source of many of the things that we struggle with in our society globally, is this idea that we have to win as opposed to we can work together and succeed. And we can say, oh, well, like we're trying to teach that, but man, like the first time I got a grade, I knew, like, why are they grading us if it's not to rank us? And why are they ranking us if not to make sure the people at the top get something the people at the bottom don't get? And like we start learning that at 5 or 6, like it's hard to pull away from that concept once you start learning it at the age of 5 or 6. We chase what's rewarded. And if we could do a better job rewarding humanity in the education system at the same level we reward straight A's, I think we can change some things.
And on lighter note, I remember you always used to talk about lollipop movements. I don't know whether you still talk about lollipop
Yeah.
movements or not. Do you still talk about lollipop movement?
Yeah, I do. I can't help it. I did a, for those who don't know out there, when I was asked to speak at a TEDx event, and this was back when there was only like a dozen TEDx events. Like it was the first or second year that they'd existed.
It was maybe in 2015 or
It was
2016, if
actually
I'm not wrong.
2010, believe it or not, my friend.
All right.
Yeah, can you believe that? And I was invited. They gave me 6 minutes, and I called my friend and said, I don't know what I'm going to say. And he said, you got to tell this story, that story you have about lollipops. And I remember saying, oh man, I can't do that. It doesn't have enough gravitas. This is a TED event. And my buddy laughed. And after a long silence said, man, you need to get over yourself. And I said, what? And he says, your entire message is that leadership is not as complex as people say. It's simpler and accessible to everyone. And here is your opportunity to spread that message to maybe more people than you'll ever have the chance to do it. And you're not going to tell the most powerful story you have because you don't think it makes you sound smart enough. Like that flies exactly in the face of what you're talking about, which is making simple things complex. And now you're not going to seize an opportunity because it doesn't have enough gravitas. And he's like, don't use that word with me. And so I went and I told that story about a girl with a lollipop. And if you want to watch it, folks, it's called Everyday Leadership or the Lollipop Moment on TED. But it's about an individual moment in the midst of all of the stuff I'd been taught to chase, because I was a super high achiever, big, like big overachiever, A-type personality. And it's the story of when I was reminded where my real legacy, as much as anyone has a legacy, is in these moments you create along the way. And it was the story of a girl coming up and telling me about one of those moments 4 years after it happened, a moment that fundamentally changed the course of her life. And I don't remember it. I don't. Still, after she told me, I don't remember it. But yeah, I still talk about lollipop moments, moments where somebody reminds you that your behavior has mattered to them and reminds you that you should pay attention to what that behavior is. Because the moment she talked about was not one that I had planned for. It was not part of my carefully laid out plan for how I could look better and have an impact and make my resume better. But I'll always talk about lollipop moments because one, like 6 million people have watched the TED Talk, so they always ask me to talk about it. But also because it's a constant reminder to myself that it's your daily behavior that matters. And so, yeah, 10 years ago, I did a TED Talk that was popular. But what have I done today that still embodies the message in that talk? Because if I haven't done it today, then it's all empty.
And this is exactly what through this podcast we are trying to empower our educators with, that they need to create their own lollipop movements, isn't it?
Yeah, without a doubt. And if anyone's listening, it's 6 minutes long. You can go and check out what we're talking about, what a lollipop moment is. But it really is just about the sometimes unrecognized moments of leadership. And what's interesting about the talk is that I engaged in an act in that talk, and the young woman does something in that talk as well. And the question is, which one is the lollipop moment? The one where someone does something kind, or the one where someone tells them how much it mattered? Which is leadership? Is it both? Is it either? I don't know. I start posing that to classrooms now who use this video, and they argue about it for an hour and then write me back and say, well, which one is it? And my answer is honestly, I have no idea. I just wanted to see if you guys could figure it out. So leadership is nuanced. People have asked me, what did you mean in your own talk about which one it was? And I'm just like, guys, I was just so scared being on a TED stage that I just went on as fast as I could. So, but yeah, I do. I still talk about a lollipop moment is a moment of powerful interpersonal impact. And I will always talk about those because to me, that's what leadership is. Powerful moments of interpersonal impact, done consciously, done daily. And that to me is what personal leadership is.
Absolutely. And on this note, it's time to say goodbye to you, my friend. It was pleasure having you on the show.
Oh man, it was so great to be invited. And again, how cool is this to have two people focus on the same thing so far apart, getting a chance to connect and talk about it. Like this is a cool thing, and this is above the great line. So thanks for putting the podcast together, because the mission of what you're trying to do is a 100% valid one and will make education better the more people who hear it. And two, thanks for thinking enough of my ideas to invite me.
Thank you for listening to The Ed Show. You can now listen to the same podcast on Apple and Google Podcasts, or you can watch it live on YouTube. And I'll see you in the next episode. Till then, stay safe and stay happy.